Yeah, we're live, 6:59. So with 1 minute to spare, hopefully all you guys are doing great tonight. Lots of cool stuff to talk excuse me, lots of cool stuff to talk about tonight. Karen, what's up? So I loaded a video today, hopefully you guys have seen it, where we tried to max out, well, we probably did, we came close, I'm sure anyway, maxed out the GT45 turbo on a fairly healthy 5.3. So there's a lot of cool things to talk about. First of all, the 5.3 itself was an impressive piece because it made over 500 horsepower, which is, I only have a handful of motors or 5.3s that I've done that with. That particular one came from the guys at Strictly Performance. And it's basically their boost ready deal. It was kind of a, you know, a nod to the stock bottom end guys. Now they had, and it was a stock block, stock crank, stock Gen 4 rods, and they had Gen 4 pistons, but they were hard anodized, which is interesting because I never really ended up doing a back-to-back test to find out the strength on those. That was originally the idea, is for me to do a really high horsepower thing like that, and that didn't work out for a couple of reasons. But that motor, when we put the other thing that motor had is they supplied it with a set of ported K-Tech heads from it. So they were 706 heads that K-Tech did and not a full-on, you know, porting deal, like not like a stage 2 or stage 2.5 stuff that we get from Total Engine Airflow back in the day. So this was a much more minor thing. But the thing is, this particular motor, I thought, okay, well, it's not going to need ported heads anyway for what we're doing. But they were nice to have. Obviously, they looked nice. They had good springs and all that. We put a very good size cam in this thing, probably the biggest one that I've run maybe on a 5.3 on a stock bottom end. It was the Summit stage 4 cam. So it was like 234 intake duration, which is quite a bit. And it seemed to fit and didn't hit anything. So that worked out good. But having the ported heads and I seem to remember, I need to go back and look actually to be sure, but I think that was a flat top piston. So I think that they use like the 4.8 style piston or the HO style piston with that, which would make sense, which would allow it to make more power. I've never done a stock bottom end deal like where we start with an L33 or an LC9 or some other kind of high output 5.3. I have done 4.8 stuff, but obviously that's going to be lower compression and it's going to be a smaller motor too. So I've never run one with the Brian Tooley always wanted me to run one of these high output 5.3s because he likes the fact that it has 243 heads on it. It also has a flat top piston. So it had a lot of stuff going for it. But this one was a ported 706 head and the flat top piston, I think, and the big stage 4 Summit cam. And then also we had a fast LSXR intake, 102 millimeter throttle body. We had big, I think, 1 7/8 headers on it, all tuned with the fast system. And the thing made impressive power NA. I mean, it made over 500 horsepower and a good amount of torque. The torque was over 500 foot-power. No, it was over 400 foot-pounds, 432 foot-pounds. Over 500 foot-pounds would be a lot. That was the 6-liter. But 432 foot-pounds, and I'm sure you guys noticed that I put 426 in there. That was actually the first torque peak in the plateau, and so I made a mistake and put that in the data. The 432 foot-pounds, so that was good. It was good to start out with, and then that allowed us to make good power at fairly low boost levels. Like we didn't have to run more than 10.6 pounds or so at the power peak anyway on this test to get this thing making a lot of power, nearly 800 horsepower. And I think that on the GT45, that might be the most, it's got to be close to the most I've made. We might have done 800 on the 383 that I did way back, but that was actually a CX Racing GT45, and it might have been a little different configuration. For some reason, I remember that one being a little bit bigger than the ones that they used on the DNA one. But at any rate, we made 793 horsepower, which is really good. And in that video, hopefully you guys have all watched it, you can see we get really big gains when we turn the boost up, but we get really big gains down low where the turbo can still support that power output. But then the boost falls off. They all look like, especially as we go up in boost, they look like factory boost curves, because that always happens with the factory guys is they, the thing hits really hard and has a lot of torque, and the thing feels really good and promises a lot, not unlike the old tune port motors or a 5-liter Mustang engine that had lots of torque. And then it just kind of, becomes less enthusiastic and less impressive as the RPMs go out, because, in those cases, they had really long runners. But a falling boost curve will do that. So we had a lot of boost, as much as 14 pounds on the 10-pound run, and then it kind of fell off because the turbo is just not going to support the boost and the power level associated with that boost on that NA motor, because it just doesn't have the flow rate. And I thought that we had back pressure readings on that testing, but it turns out that I did not, because I went and searched through the data, and it would have been good to have that. I took back pressure readings on a lot of other tests with the GT45, so we have a fairly good idea what they do, and it's much better on a smaller motor, like sub 6 liter. The 5.3 is pretty good, the 4.8 is good, and it worked well, obviously, with low back pressure on when we ran it on the 2.4 liter Honda K-Series motor. That's a good application. If you're running it on an even smaller one, it would be good. I kind of wish somebody had compressor maps for these, and it would help with some of the stuff that I'm doing. But doing this made me realize that I need to do a video on wastegates, so people understand not just the function of a wastegate. And obviously, we have to start there, that this is what a wastegate does and why it's doing what it does, and then how we alter that, how we make it more effective with changing the reference lines and changing the controllers and things like that, and how we can make them more responsive and stuff. Dan saying top fuelers use hard anodized pistons. Yeah, I haven't ever tried that other than when we got this motor from them. This was nothing special about the turbo kit run on this test. It was the stock exhaust manifolds turned around, the truck manifolds with my custom Y pipe that Jason over at GT45 did. And then you can see in the photo, as a matter of fact, you can see in the photo of the thumbnail that I did for this video, that it has the adapter that adapts the V-band flange, in this case, to a T4. And we also have one for a T6. I haven't made one for a T3 because I haven't found the need yet to try a T3 on an LS. Maybe on a 4.8 we would want to try that, but certainly nothing bigger than that, because I don't think, unless we were trying to see response, like maybe on a 4.8, I would try a GT3582 or something and just kind of see what a small turbo does, and that would kind of be interesting. Otherwise, the T4 and the T6 stuff is going to be much more likely to happen, especially as a single. Now, as twins, we might try, and we did try twin the GT3582s. Sinister, I have a 2001 Ram, single cab, short bed, V6 blown, 22 RE. Should I LS swap it? I already have a 5.3. The 5.3 probably would be a better choice than the 360, unless all you want is low speed power. The bigger motor obviously would probably have more torque down low, so if that's what you want. But if you want more average power, or especially power at the top, then a 5.3 is probably going to be more efficient and a better combination than an older Magnum motor is. So on the turbo deal, the reason that I wanted to do that, and the reason I did this video, is so that we could illustrate what happens when you run out of turbo, essentially. And because we talk a lot on here and in the various videos about what happens because this is how I want people to start thinking. I want them to start thinking in terms of power output. Stop thinking about what your cam is, and stop thinking about what your displacement is and all. Just the first thing you should think about is how much power I want to make. Okay, I want to make this amount of power, and this is the turbo I need to make that amount of power. And then the other things that you do will come after that, because if you want 1,000 horsepower, you don't pick a 700 horsepower turbo, or vice versa. Really, honestly, you could pick a 1,000 horsepower turbo if you only wanted to make 700. But why would you? If you're going to run around all day at 700 and never go to 1,000, why have that extra? Because when you have that extra, and I know that you should have that extra because it's good, you're eventually going to use it. But if you didn't, if you're one of the 1 in a million guys that weren't going to turn the boost up, having all of that extra capacity out on that side means that you've reduced the response on this side. So if you want something, you're driving around town, you want to be responsive, you're only going to run 7 or 8 pounds or whatever, and drive around. You want the thing to be fun and have 50 or 60 or 70% more power. That's all very easy, and you can do that with the right size turbo. And if that's what you're doing, choose your turbo accordingly. If you put an S475 or 7875 Gen 2 or something like that on there, and you want to be in the 1,000 horsepower club, then you need to do that. And you need to accept that there are things that go along with that on a 5.3, less response problems than there are on a 4.8 if you were to use that turbo. And not as much. And on a 6 liter, it would be even better because it would be even more responsive. So all the things that you can do to improve the response rate of the bigger turbo should be done. And one of those is making your motor bigger and making your motor more efficient and all that. So that's all good stuff. I want to do a wastegate video now because, like I said, I want to talk about what they do and how we make them better and where to position them. And people have lots of questions about or wastegate sizing and even blow-off valve stuff, kind of to some extent. But a lot of that is the blow-off valve part of it is not nearly as critical as the wastegate stuff. So I want to do that, and then we got some other cool stuff going on too. So let's get to some questions from you guys, and let me know if you guys have seen these videos. And while on this particular test, this motor that we ran, the strictly performance deal, the one that we ran this test on, we ran a ton of other tests on this. Like I ran this thing non-intercooled and intercooled. We ran it with a Summit turbo. We ran it with a Vortec. We ran it non-intercooled with a Vortec and also intercooled with a Vortec. I mean, we ran a ton of stuff. So there's lots and lots of data there, and some of those videos are already up, but it's a lot of good stuff. Frosty cold beverage. Okay, let's get to some questions here. So I'm starting out. You want 420.69 horsepower? Wow, second decimal point. That's pretty good. How important is ring gap on a low boost, 8 psi, water meth injection, small block forward with factory ring gap, non-intercooled? The boost level is not critical. It's what you're looking at is ring temperature. So if you're under boost for a long time, that can create as much of a problem as a higher boost does. And water meth works good, but the problem is I don't know what kind of intake manifold you have, and if distribution is a problem, you'll have problems in one cylinder and not in another cylinder. So you'll be reducing the overall charge temperature wherever you're directing the water meth injection. But is all that coolness getting evenly to all the cylinders? That's one of the problems with that. No, I won't even try the GT45. It won't make 600 horsepower on your 4.8. Okay. Buddy of mine's running twin 76 millimeter precision. So that's a lot of power potential on an LSX 427. That's enough motor. And 20 pounds, that's good. That could be a lot of power there. How well are 2 GT45s going to work on a 6 liter? Well, if you take a look at the test I have up on the big block of 454, we ran 2 GT45s, and they'll go, you know, well over 4-digit power levels. They'll go way into past 1,000 horsepower with those. 2 of them is going to be kind of laggy, much less so on a 6 liter than on a 5.3. But, you know, because they can make 13 or 1400 horsepower, is that where you need to go with that? Those are not the 2 that I would pick for 1,000 horsepower. But if you want to do more than that, then they will definitely work. Famous last words. My small block Ford lasted 2 days with 8 pounds in a bad tune. Yeah, they might not last 5 minutes with a bad tune. Yeah, if you don't want 13 or 1400 horsepower, then 2 smaller GT35s might be a good answer. Yeah, 4 numbers definitely are better than 3, right? Oh, and a V-drive jet boat. See, it can't be both of those, right? It can't be a V-drive jet boat. It just has to be either a jet or a V-drive. If it's a jet boat, then you don't have to worry so much about lag, because in a jet boat, you have instantly a lot of engine speed. It works kind of like a really high stall speed converter. So that works good. On a V drive, unless you have a multi-speed transmission, which is not unusual in a V drive. I know the one that I had a 2-speed power glide in it. And that you use that so that you can, keep the thing in kind of a responsive range. But on a jet boat, just like with a jet ski, that's why they can use turbos on those, and that's why they use centrifugal blowers on those. Because when you nail it and you shoot the RPMs up to 5,000 RPM or whatever, then you have obviously lots of response and lots of airflow from the turbos. No wastegate. I want it all. The problem with that is that works. It works good if you, like in this case of this GT45, if we had no wastegate on it, we just capped it, then we would just be limited on the top end by whatever the flow rate of the turbo is. So let's say it made 800, just for a number. The problem you're going to run into is on the other side, like at 3,500 RPM, where it might only do 11 pounds at 6,500, but at 3,500, it can do 30 or 40 pounds with no wastegate. And that's where you're going to blow it up, because unregulated, it's going to do whatever it can. And down there where it's not airflow limited, it can do a lot. I have a lot of experience with import 4 cylinders with boost, particularly NA engines that I boosted. It's always good to gap the rings beforehand. Yeah, ring gap, I always recommend ring gap. How much boost would you have to run on a 4.8 with a GT45 to get 600 to the tire? Not very much. I have 4.8 videos up with GT45, so you can take a look at that. If you want 600 to the tire, just figure 700 and 700 flywheel, and that gives you a pretty good idea. And we did that a lot with that turbo. So, and it's also going to depend on how stout your 4.8 is NA. If it's just a bone stock one, those typically make about 330 the way that we run them on the engine dyno, just bone stock. And so I would recommend putting a cam in it. So any kind of cam and springs, and you're going to be getting up closer to 400, then it's pretty easy to get to those numbers with boost. A 727 should take that kind of power. What are your thoughts on the Truck Norris cams? Well, and Brian's a really good guy. He's a really honest guy. So if I look at his data that they've got in their testing, that Truck Norris cam is going to be really impressive. If it does as good or better than the torque cam down low, and then it does a lot better out of the top, it's going to be a really good combination. Eco Traveler, thank you very much. Twin GT45s will make like 1,600 horsepower. I'd like to see that. I don't know if that's the case. Have I ever tested variable vane turbos? Only on the chassis dyno, and only factory ones. You think it's time for an adult beverage? 5-0, thanks for the support. Tom's back. What would good size be for 5.3s shooting for 1,200 wheel horsepower? Then you're probably going to have to use something like the GT45s. I don't think that I don't think GT35s would get you there. Maybe two like S366s, or even something slightly smaller than that. Hyperprotective pistons with ring gap survive. You just want to make sure you don't detonate them. But we're talking about doing with cast pistons, so those will work fine as long as you don't run into detonation. Falcon wants me to do instructional videos on wastegate size and placement and turbo orientation and oil feed. The problem is like things like turbo orientation and wastegate placement and all that and oil feed and drain and stuff is that we run everything on the engine dyno. And so a lot of those things are going to be very specific to a chassis. And I'm not going to do that in a chassis because if I did it in a chassis, it would only be for one chassis. I can show you where to get oil feed from, but that's fairly straightforward because it's always where the oil sending unit is for a gauge or something. And then again, because we're setting it up on the engine dyno, our placement is not going to be where you would put it in a car. So 67 millimeters. Okay, so I was right on the 366. Charles, twin GT45s on the turbo. So take a look at the big block deal that I did. 5 pounds of boost on 91 octane at mile high with aluminum hedge and forged dome pistons. What's the static compression on that? And I don't know what you should do is base your timing under boost on whatever your NA timing was. And I don't know what your combination wanted for maximum timing. Fiend, why do you keep asking the same question? Turbo Tim, your 6762s should probably work then. I don't know, ask Tim. Okay, the 35s would probably work. Yeah, I don't know too much about the HX series. I haven't run them that much. I haven't run them at all. I've run other whole set stuff, but not those. Have you noticed any disadvantage to upping fuel pressure? No, we do that a lot on the engine dyno. If we're running out of available fuel flow and we can add another 10 pounds, and as long as the pump can keep up with that, we do that. Sometimes we don't even run boost reference regulators. We'll just run, and that's usually if we have a really big injector in it and we have more fuel than we need, and the delta pressure we can take the delta pressure going down without any problem because we have so much more injector than we need. Richard, I bought a truck with a factory 60 millimeter Garrett because you said boost is always better. Now I drive around whistling with blow off valves popping up. That's good. Do certain spark plugs and coils add horsepower? No, the only way that they'll add power is if they cure a misfire problem that's coming from a bad plug or a bad coil. Otherwise, this thing about them adding coil energy or whatever. The one thing I can say is that we know that when we change the dwell time of the coils, that we can change the power. So maybe if you had a coil that was that was insufficient, but you'd almost always see that as misfire though. Any word on the head for the 2.2 or 2. The 2.5 head is still not even off of the 2.5. I mean, I took it off and looked at it, but it's not been sent in yet. So the 2.2 head is the one off of the motor that I used in the video is at the machine shop right now. The other one that Vizard is porting, he's having cleaned, and I don't have any baseline flow numbers yet for it. Can you put a stage 2 cam in a stock 5.3? Yeah, you can put a stage 4 cam in a stock 5.3. Single HX35 is enough to run 1170s. Nice. Ooh, on a 3800, that's good. How about I send you one of these 80 millimeter? I have an S480 already that it's Freiburger's, but I can use it whenever I want. GT40 on a 3800 will run high 10s. GT45. Well, the GT45 will support, as we saw, almost 800 horsepower. That's way more than enough to run 10s. 3 small block Chevy with a single turbo to make 450 horsepower. That's going to be really easy. You'll probably make more like 450 horsepower NA, and then you'll add boost to that out of a 383 because it's pretty easy to do. I've got 10.5 to 1 compression running 36 degrees of timing in my big block. Just don't want to run into detonation. So if you put the timing, and if you're only going to run 5 or 6 pounds, and you're in Utah and you're at altitude, I think if you pulled 10 degrees out of that, it would be safe. Get hit by a tornado, that's not good. Were you happy with the large stage 4 cam you ran on the 5.3? The motor made good power. I don't know about driving that around because we didn't drive it around on the dyno. I actually put that cam in hopes of running the Vortec and making a big number with the Vortec, because on a centrifugal blower, you want lots of camshaft in it. On the GT45, if I was picking a turbo for it, especially if I was picking a turbo for it that I was going to put in a vehicle, it wouldn't have been that camshaft. It would have been something much smaller. Patrick, we use the TC1 controller, and it's a 3-port. I haven't used the Holly for boost control. I probably could, but we just haven't. The other one is already hooked up and wired and run out there, so it's really easy for us to hook up. Ever mess with any mid or rear mount turbo setups? Take a look at the video that I have up on rear mount turbos, and you'll get your answer. So the answer is yes. Quick question. What do you think TBI Vortec engines board 60 over with twin GT45 comp cam, dual plane intake, blow through carburetor? Are you using the stock heads? The stock head's going to be kind of limiting on that, but you can make lots of power with that. I mean, let's say that motor makes, if you have a stock head on it, I don't know, a 525 lift doesn't really tell me anything about that camshaft. I need to know what the duration is. But let's say that motor made 350 horsepower NA. And so with the GT45, you could easily go to 500 or 600 with a blow-through carburetor. Yeah, the K24 did really good with the GT45, but it did good with all of the turbos. And the H22s love it too. So that HX35 is smaller than a GT3582. That's going to be pretty small. The twin GT45s work good on the big block. Do you think twin VS 7875s? It's going to be laggy, but if you're trying to make, like, that's 2,000 horsepower with a turbo. So if you want your stuff from 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower, those are the kind of turbos that you're going to need. If you only want 1,500, you could do something smaller than that, and they'd be more responsive. We sent the whole 2.2 to the machine shop. They took the whole motor, all the parts, and the whole shebang. I ran a GT45 on my 6-liter with flat tops and sloppy stage 2. It made, yeah, 500 would be really easy for that combination. What turbine AR would you recommend for like a 3800 or Ford 3.8? What size turbo are you putting on there to begin with? Turbo Tim, happy to help. This was, Tim, the test was run on E85. Enrique, that's way too much turbo for 1300. GTX 5009R for 2.2. Funny Fallon will support 100 pounds a minute. Oh, 5.2 pressure ratio. So it's got a really, really tall map, then that's what you need. Have you ever seen a Renault Formula One V6? Yes. Yeah, I have the Formula One Turbo book. It's really good stuff. The factory heads have been milled for higher lift. So probably you mean they've been machined, like the valve guides have been machined? Two GT45s will easily support 1,000 horsepower. They'll support more like 13 or 1,400. Your jet built's at 3,500 to 4,500. Well, with two GT45s or even with one GT45, you're going to probably have to change the impeller on that because you're going to be running more engine speed than that. I would be surprised if you're not going 1,000 RPM faster with boost. What should a 505 big block put out? Anywhere from 400 horsepower to I don't know, 1,000 horsepower, depending on the combination. Trying to make 400 wheel out of my 4.8. What should I do? I want to keep it NA and on pump gas. That's going to be very, very difficult. 400 flywheel would be possible out of a 4.8, but 400 wheel horsepower means it's going to have to run lots and lots of engine speed to do that. And you can do it on 91 if it's an NA motor, but it's going to take compression. It's going to take a big camshaft. It's going to take ported heads. It's going to take an intake manifold. It's going to take lots of stuff. No, rear mount, Dave, rear mount usually means that the turbos are positioned like in the bed of the truck, or even mid mounts can kind of be between the bed of the truck and the engine, somewhere in the middle, somewhere that's just easier to package them because the engine bay won't contain them. There's just not enough room. If you want 500 horsepower from a 3800, was I think your question, I wouldn't pick a GT45. I would pick a GT35 82. What kind of racing? I've done mostly road racing. So I ran in World Challenge, SECA, Showroom Stock, and A Sedan, and Formula 2000, and Bridgestone Supercar. And I've also done a lot of Bonneville stuff. What is the detonation factor? I don't know what detonation factor means. The octane rating is 110 to 112 is usually what they give, but the rating for E85 is actually different than it is for gasoline. 20 inches in diameter. Is that the impeller size, or is that's got to be the housing size, right? James is in the house. Sacramento, Wairika, both of those are good. Yeah, John, if it was only $2, you got to buy that, right, at the thrift store. 408 with a 98 111. That's a good size turbo. That's like a man-sized turbo. I don't know how much more that turbo would go. We've made a little over 800. Twins recommended for the 383. If you're only doing low boost, put two GT35s on it. Jeff, always liked oversized twins. I like that they come in pairs. Will you ever test a Maggie 2300 or 2650? I have run, excuse me, I have run a 2300, a heartbeat one. I've not run an LSA blower, although Terry was supposed to get me one to test with, but I haven't done much testing on them. I was building motors before I went to Bonneville, though. Test an inner chiller. Is that the cooler in between the lid and the bottom of a high ram? I ran one of those on Finnegan's motor. Jonathan, if you're talking about your 383, your mild one, I wouldn't worry about that. An 87 octane 5.3. You can run the factory run one on 87. I run 87 or 87 in my truck all the time. That's all I ever put in it. Richard, I bought your book. I hope it helps with assembly. It's not. My books are not assembly motor or manuals. They're not how-tos. All of my stuff is just dyno testing. 408 with a 98 111 1.12 1.24. Which exhaust merge? Max effort 8th mile, no prep car. I'm not sure. I would lean toward a 2.5 on the Y pipe if that's what you're doing. Run as big of an exhaust as you can. 408 should be. Do you have both housings on those? If you have both housings, I would like to try both of them, but I would go with the bigger one to start out with and just see how it spools, because that's the thing that you're going to be worried about. You need to worry if you can get the thing up on the trans brake or however you're launching it. Yes, 2 GT2871s should support 600 wheel horsepower. Yeah, Dave, a lot of times guys will do that. They'll run smaller diameter tubing to get the response rate up on the remote stuff. The response test or the remote test that I did, my stuff was way too big and it was way too long. The GLH needs a land speed. If I was going to run a land speed with a 2.2 turbo motor, first of all, it wouldn't be 2.2. It'd be less than 2 liters. And it would also be in a Rampage and not a GLH. .600 wheel horsepower with twins for those should do that, right? James, that all aluminum 5.3 is good for as much power as you want to make. That's going to be a 2012. That's going to be an L33 or an LC9 or something, and those can make lots of power. Wait, is it a 12? Is not going to be an L83, right? I don't know when they changed over. Somebody let me know. Rear mount oilless. I'm still up in the air about oilless turbos. Twin S257 SXE on a 395 Hemi. Turbo Tim, I've only driven Subaru WRXs, but I haven't done. We did some way back. We did some chassis dyno stuff, but I haven't taken one apart or done anything great to them. Demon Tech, much bigger than 20 inches in diameter. That's really big. World's fastest Indian. That's good. That's good stuff. I have an L83 with a mid-mount GT45 in my truck. No turbo lag. That thing makes a lot of average power thanks to variable cam timing and high compression and lots of stuff. Do you remember the article you wrote for Motor Trend? Well, it wouldn't have been for Motor Trend. It would have been for Muscle Mustangs or somebody, but now I think it's probably all converted over. 462 valve for $2,300. Honestly, don't remember that. Was it like supercharged or something, or turbocharged? What was it? That might have been the one that I did for Hot Rod, where we just put a turbo on the 2 valve. Carcraft, July of '89. Is that you answering? Can you tell us what this is? Section the gavel for the fastest judge in traffic court. That was me. That's right. Can you run NOS through a turbo? Yes. I have a video up where we didn't run it through the turbo, but you can. I use turbo as the intercooler, which, by the way, doesn't work that great. But when you add nitrous to a turbo motor, that works really good. Everybody over at Sloppy's watching? Yeah, doesn't Matt have Cletus on right now? I should be over there. Turns out they were TD06 frames. What does the exhaust flange look like on that turbo? Got a bolt together converter and a dump valve. It's a 5-inch exhaust housing to Y to dual 5-inch. Okay, that's enough exhaust. So do you have a quick spool valve or something on it? I won't have a video on the Magnuson. Dave, thank you very much. Anytime you have questions, please let me know. Rocket Surgeon's here. You'd be better off destroking the 2.2 to 1.5 to meet the H class. I did a 1.5 liter B series to run in H, and it worked pretty well. And then I ended up giving the motor to somebody, and he ended up breaking it. Got a GT45 on my LS1 at 8 PSI, made 650 wheel horsepower. So like 700 horsepower at 8 pounds. That seems like an awful lot. I haven't done a direct back-to-back test of thermal barrier coating. I did a test one time, a cool test of a barrier coating. It was called it was some kind of snake or something. And what I had them do is they coated the top of the piston. It was sprayed on like with a plasma spray or something. And I forgot he said it was applied at like Mach 6 or something like that. It was impregnating the aluminum and all that. And so we wanted to show how tough it was and how it was actually stronger than the aluminum piston was. So after we did that, we put the piston in an autoclave and melted the piston down. And then the coating just kind of floated in a little pool of piston, which I thought was really cool. It'd have been a much better video than it was as a magazine story. Roots blowers do not compress air as they spin. They just move air from one side to the other. A twin screw compresses the air. It's a true compressor. You have a K code 289 out of a 66 in your 86 Fox. You would be probably, I mean, that's cool that you can say that, but you'd be much better off going to get a 5-liter out of an Explorer and turbocharging that. CX Racing single turbo. Yeah, I've run a lot of those. Yeah, Ron, you can test the power consumption of an oil pump, because if you improve the power, you'll see that on the dyno. If you make a modification to the pump and you do a structured back-to-back test and you improve the flow rate or something, or decrease the parasitic loss associated with driving that pump, you'll see that in terms of power. We need a blower runoff, compare all the blowers. Like, what kind of blowers did you want to test? Because I already have multiple videos up comparing a twin screw and a roots blower and a centrifugal blower and a turbo. So I don't know what I missed there. The TD06 is a T3 flange. Okay. Hydrazine. I'm probably not going to test that. Let's see. I don't know what you're talking about, Rex. Yeah, I thought Engine Masters did a bunch of pump tests, and I think that Jeff Smith did a pump test way back too for the magazines. Is the EA888, is that the one that has the cylinder head that's the exhaust all comes together and that the turbo bolts right to the exhaust? Because we had one in I'm saying it was what was the first year that the GSR Beetle came out? That's what they wanted us to run at Bonneville. And that head was terrible. We kept trying to talk them into allowing us to use the previous generation motor because it was much better. Squirrels in the house. Ross, are you trying to do a single turbo or a twins on that? Wade, we're happy to help. Somebody had a question about running a boosted LS3. I'm trying to click on this thing and it's not. We don't usually go over 1,000 horsepower on those aluminum blocks or an LS1 or an LS2, but the 5.3 stuff is we do. Yeah, and you might see that if you port the oil pump, it's actually processing more oil, and it may actually cost you power. Would an intercooler be necessary for twin rear mount turbos? Yes. Always intercooler. Has a unified exhaust manifold with the block. Doug, I don't know how much of a gain you'd get going from the Gen 1 to the Gen 2.5. You'd probably better to ask Byron. I'm sure that they've probably done a test on that. Maybe Matt has also done a test on that. Yeah, Ron, I saw the claims on the 2.2 stuff. I'm definitely going to do that. Not because I want more power, but I would just like more oiling. But if it's 5 horsepower on that motor, that would actually be fairly easy to test because it has such a low power output. 5 horsepower on 1,000 horsepower is really hard to get, really hard to test accurately. But 5 horsepower on 100 horsepower is actually pretty easy to test. Ross, usually the choice between single or twin is packaging. So however you can fit that. There are turbos that will make it do what you want it to do in terms of size for that power output. So twins will do it and a single will do it. Did you tell me how much power you wanted to make? Turbo Tim, I don't know about the tuning software for books. James, that was me asking about the LS3. Got an opportunity to get one cheap. Well, if you have an opportunity to get an LS3 cheap, you should always get it because that's a good motor. Even if you're not going to run 1,000,000 pounds of boost with it, those are always good motors, and you can always fix it up. Even if you've sold it later on, you could get good power out of it. But if you're going to make a lot of power and go into 4-digit stuff, I would use an iron block or an L33 or LC9, one of the aluminum 5.3s. What turbo would you select for a 6-liter LS with 823 heads, targeting 1,000 flywheel? Would you go with a T4? Both a T4 or a T6, both of them will make that 1,000 horsepower without any problem. I know that when we run, somebody had mentioned oil level. This is particularly important on big block stuff. When we run them on the dyno, we can see big changes in power, sometimes as much as 30 horsepower on big blocks just by adjusting the oil level. I think Engine Masters may have even did a video on that because it's so prevalent when I run stuff with Steve. That's one of the things that we always do on the big blocks. Invariably, the pans that they tell us, oh, that's a 8-quart pan or 10-quart pan. And if you run that oil level on the dyno, you're going to have oil control problems and you're going to make less power. So we always then adjust the oil level until we get the power curve and the oil pressure curve that we want. LS3 ProCharge F1X on E85. Do I need an intercooler? Yes, I would always run an intercooler. Is Una at max speeding rods here? Let's see. Yeah, having it, excuse me, James, having it way less, that's always beneficial, but not if you reduce strength, though. Snafu 75 350 factory heads, factory 75 heads. Okay, that's Edelbrock RPM air gap 212 224 10.5 to 1. I'm thinking that that's going to be 218 224. It's going to be sub 400 horsepower, I think. Cammed up LS3 makes 600 horsepower NA. It's really, really hard to take a stock LS3 with a cam and make 600 horsepower. 600 flywheel horsepower. 575 or so is a pretty good number. To get 600, you might be able to do it if you put a like big single plane intake manifold on it. You're gonna lose all the bottom end that you would get, but that might allow you to run it high enough at an RPM that you could get a bigger peak number. But with a factory LS3 manifold and a cam, it'd be really hard to get 600. Dry sump is a really good idea. Can't we just write Shelby on the offie and call it good and then run 60 pounds of boost? Richard, are you saying that 1,000 horsepower my 6 liter is dangerous? Should I go cast block? I don't, Punk, I don't, that's the end of your name there. I don't know I don't remember what block you have. Dave, thanks for showing up. The Holley high ram with the sandwich brick intercooler that we ran worked pretty well. I mean, I don't know what the ultimate like flow rate is of that core or the ultimate heat rejection capability is. The 1,000 horsepower reliable for the whole Indy race. Actually, the motor that I want, like if I guess if I could have any motor that I wanted, but I'd want it to be ultra easy to work on and stuff, would be one of the Chevy Mercedes Ilmor motors that they outlawed with Indy, the one that they used to get around the stock block rule because it had push rods, except it had push rods that were this long and rockers and stuff. And so they were able to run more boost, and they just killed everybody. And then the organizers said, "Oh wait, we were thinking when we said that they had push rod motors, we were thinking small block Chevys and Buicks and that kind of stuff." And they're like, "Yeah, but that's not what it said." So we built a dedicated race motor using push rods, and it was it's just awesome that they were able to do that. They were outlawed, but that to me is like thinking outside the box. AJ, that change in LSA didn't change 15 horsepower. The rating that you're seeing was something else. It could have been a tune. It could have been timing. It could have been other things. $1994, yeah. That was like Rick Mears and Little Al was probably racing in '94, right? And Karen is my wife. Too lazy to change the YouTube profile. I hear you. Yeah, Frank, look up Chevy Ilmor Indy motor. Yeah, 240. It's really fast. Yeah, ammo. Yeah, I like watching Little Al race and Michael, and Rick Mears was my guy. Karen is not a Karen. No. Nobody needs to be a Karen. That's not good. I remember seeing one of those motors, and I got about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes here. I remember seeing one of those Ilmor motors on display, and I don't think it was Chevrolet. I thought it was Mercedes, but it was one of the people that had them on display. I think it was at PRI, and I'm walking by, and I stopped because everyone was walking around looking at other stupid things. And I walked by, and I stopped, and I'm like, "Oh man, this is super cool." And the guy walked over, and he was an engineer, and he said, you know what that is? I said, oh yeah, I know what it is. And so we got to talking, and he's like, oh, it's so awesome to find somebody that's like so enthusiastic about this. I said, well, so how long are the push rods, and what's the rocker ratio? What, you know, because we were going into all kinds of stuff. And he's like, oh, this is super cool. Somebody, because he was just walking around not doing anything, and he finally found some guy that was like, you know, fanboying over the motor. What's a good budget turbo for the LQ9? GT45. If you ran two GT45s, you might see a little bit of power at the top, but you're not going to see it at 5 pounds and 6 pounds and 8 pounds. It's just going to be more laggy. Ford camera motors are good. I don't remember the last time I watched a cup race. Okay, one more minute. Who's got the last cool question for me? Dan, you were a crew chief? Man, you got some good stories in. I can tell you that back in the day when they had, I think they still do, but this was way early on when they had I always went to the Long Beach Grand Prix because I like watching the Indy cars race there, and all the support series, because I ran in Bridgestone Supercar. So we were actually a support series, and we raced there. It was really fun. But the NOS guys are not too far away from that. They were not too far away from that. And there was more than a few racers going there for extra help qualifying. How much ring gap should I run in our 3.3 liter Porsche? You don't need those. Those have really low compression. You can run all the boost, and the rings can actually be touching when you put them in. Will 243 heads work without milling? Yes, they will. You're going to watch Sloppy? I should go over and see what Matt's doing. Matt's good people. I don't know Garrett, but he seems like a good guy. Okay, guys, got to get going. If you haven't, go look at the video. If you haven't already taken a look, go over and support Matt, obviously, and you know, because he's good people. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow.